Okay, thanks everyone for being here. This is our first research paper presentation of the Brown-Harvard Joint Seminar for the year. We had an earlier event on a panel on Bangladesh earlier in the semester, and we also had an event at Brown on the 2024 Indian election. So this is the Brown-Harvard Joint Seminar. I think it's the 13th year, is that right, Ashu, of us running this? Yeah. Ashu sort of convened it from the start and has continued it throughout. And the seminar meets both at Harvard and Brown this year, so do look out on the Mittal website for the upcoming events. Today we have Varun KR, who will be our presenter. Varun is an assistant professor of political science and international relations at the University of Southern California. Previously, he was the inaugural Gerhard Casper postdoctoral fellow in the rule of law at the Center for Democracy Development and the Rule of Law at Stanford University. He obtained his PhD in political science from Rochester in 2022, and his primary research is focused on political economy of development with a lot of really great work in the South Asian context, specifically India. Today, he'll present some co-authored work with Gaurav Sood, and the paper is titled The Limits of Electoral Gender Quotas in Rural Local Bodies. And then after Varun presents, we'll have discussing comments from Thibaut Marseille, who is an assistant professor in political science at Boston College, who also does extensive work on India, rural politics, has done a lot of work in Uttar Pradesh. So I think this will be a really great discussion. Varun mentioned that he's happy to take some questions throughout, but I guess we'll sort of, moderate, and if we want to push some longer discussions to the Q&A, we have quite a bit of time to cover that as well. So without further ado, Ashu, anything to add? No. Okay, so Varun, take it away.
Thank you.
Happy to have you.
Thank you. First of all, thanks a lot for inviting me. I followed the South Asia seminar for a while, even when I was not a graduate student. It was when it was started. I think you started sometime to upload it on YouTube. Not all of them though. So thank you for the invitation. It's a privilege to present here. Before I start, I just want to give a brief kind of motivation for how I got interested in this topic. For a while before graduate school, I was training aspiring local politicians in Bangalore. So there's this good governance initiative where people were training aspiring politicians. And that is when I learned about reservations being in place and like rural local governments. I was not trained in social sciences back then. And then when I started graduate school, I saw that there's a thriving literature in this, and then put one and two together, and here we are. So today I'm talking about the limits of electoral gender quotas, and this is focused on rural local bodies, and I'll clarify why or what's the rationale for having that upfront in the title. And this is co-authored with Gaurav Sood, who's an independent researcher, works in the industry and does social science as a hobby. Anyway, to start with, I don't think this audience needs this to be explained, but men dominate political representation worldwide, right? And in any way you cut it at local, like state or at federal levels across the world, men dominate politics. However, in addition to being important in and of itself, we now know quite a bit that women in power address the development deficit that women face. And the development deficit is often the case because women are not in power, so there is nobody representing women's interests in politics. The second is the idea that having women in power has the potential to shift public attitudes about women's perceived political competence. And there is the technical term as people tend to call it statistical discrimination, where women are perceived to be less competent than others. And the final thing is there is this distaste or a taste-based discrimination, which when women are in power, there's a potential that can be reduced, right? And kind of we know that there is this mismatch in who represents across the world. So countries widely have adopted electoral quotas to kind of correct this imbalance, so to speak, right? And today, and this number keeps changing, so this is a conservative estimate, more than 140 countries have electoral quotas of some form. I mean, they come in different varieties, and I'll quickly get into what they are. Broadly speaking, electoral quotas are a way to guarantee group representation. This can be any group. It can be, like in this paper's case, it is women, but it could be minorities, or it could be any group for that matter, and not necessarily in politics, but the talk will be about electoral quotas. right? And two types are candidate nomination quotas, where a fraction of individuals nominated by parties belong to this group. There are reserved seat quotas where a fixed seats are assigned to a specific group. That is, in a certain set of seats, only the group gets to run and the entire population votes them to office. So this paper analyzes the effects of, I should put removing in quotes here, removing quotas on women's representation at the same level. Now, you might be wondering, do they ever remove quotas? As a matter of fact, quotas are seldom removed. There have been some instances where political parties have tried to remove it in the Indian context, but there are legal challenges and so to speak. But broadly speaking, it's incredibly politically costly to remove quotas once they are implemented. But there is a kind of a design strategy which will kind of mimic the removal of quotas that I'll explain shortly. Just to take a step back, what are the expectations from gender quotas, right? So in this paper, like I said, quotas generally can be for any group, but the paper focuses on gender, women's quotas specifically. One of the goals of gender quotas, like the aim is to create a self-sustaining cycle of increased women's representation. So in a world where there are no women, once you introduce quotas, you have women in power, and then quotas hope that that will continue in the long run as well. At least that's the kind of the ideal goal of a quota policy. And why is what creates these self-sustaining cycles, right? One is that it is argued in the literature and by many that gender quotas winners have a taste for policies that favor women. Now, conventional political economy models would say that elected representatives would cater to the median voter, but it has been shown that the gender quota winners have a kind of a preference for women's policies. Now, again, based on my experience talking to political candidates, when you talk to male politicians, often they're worried about making big roads or stuff like that, right? Nobody thinks about, at least men don't think about having women's toilets, like, which is a very, very politically salient issue. And when you see women in power, these are the kind of issues that gets addressed, which are extremely important, but often because of the representational gaps, this development deficit is visible, and it is certainly visible, say, in rural India. And I have a small anecdote here. My mother was a bank employee. She worked for a nationalized bank. She never drank water for 30 years of her work. And her reason was that the bank did not have a toilet for women. Or even if it existed, it was not usable. So in that sense, this is not just a political thing, but this kind of development deficits are seen in many spheres.
But in the Duflo Chattopadhyay article, there was also, other than women's toilets, there were also things like childcare.
Yes, water supply and sanitation.
Supply, right?
Yes.
They term them as women's issues much more than men's issues. And men were absolutely focused on things like buildings and roads.
Exactly, that's right. Yeah. So which is what I broadly call as a development deficit from a women's point of view. Also, by quotas, you are introducing a set of people into politics who would otherwise not be in politics. At least if you look at the numbers, that is clearly evident. Before quotas in India, women's representation was abysmally low at the local levels. In fact, I have numbers for the city of Bombay where it was like in the single digits, right? But after quotas, this has dramatically changed, and I'll get to some specifics soon. The other argument is that once you see women in power and once you see effective leaders, they serve as role models for other women, and there could be other follow-on effects also, right? But the question still remains, like, one of the literature has focused on this at the early onset of the quotas in India, where quotas were introduced and people started studying them. But to what extent do we see these increased self cycles of increased representation, right? Now, in that sense, I'll get to this quickly, but quota in its sense is a self-obsolescing institution. So by virtue of it working, you don't need it anymore. So if it is really working, you wouldn't need it, right? So in that sense, that's the design of quota. So this paper aims to kind of see whether that is happening. I've given enough precursor to the research question here. The main question that I'm trying to see here is, do electoral quotas increase women's representation in the same electoral body once quotas are removed? Now, people have looked at spillover representation. Fayeed looks at spillovers for Muslims, another marginalized group in India. People have looked at spillovers above, spillovers horizontally. In that sense, this is like a horizontal spillover, but more than that, If there are other spillovers, it is imperative for us to know whether it is working in the electoral body where these quotas are actually applied.
Can you say a bit more?
Uh-huh.
I mean, not everybody has read the paper here, but a bit more about why you're discussing when quotas are removed.
Yeah, I'll
do that.
I'll do it in like 3 slides. I'll see I'll have a detailed description of the research design, right? But quick preview of findings. A very tepid set of findings, unfortunately, is quotas do not significantly increase women's chances once they are removed. There is, however, mechanical improvement due to de jure policy compliance, and this is not trivial. A lot of times policy implementation itself has a lot of gaps, but we do see a large degree of policy compliance in India. There is no evidence for self-sustaining cycles. That is, once removed, do we really see women winning again and again? Without quotas, there is at least no evidence so far. And that is, we base our analysis on 2 very large Indian states. And this audience, I don't have to explain, but if it's an audience filled with American people, I would often tell them that these 2 states have a population of more than the United States. I don't think I have to say that here. 3 potential mechanisms. They could be very hard to kind of see why something is not working.
What time?
20 years from 2005 to 2020. So there are 4 electoral cycles. So 3 potential mechanisms. We have evidence to show that men have become the unintended beneficiaries of quota policies. So in a sense, women are not getting to govern, which is one of the reasons why we are not seeing these increased cycles of representation. Perceived candidate quality on certain dimensions are weaker. I'll get to the specifics very quickly. And finally, dosage, that is, in spite of having repeated quotas, we are not seeing increase in representation. However, cannot rule out the fact that we may need more quotas. After all, quotas have been in place for like, say, 20 years, but discriminatory attitudes are like centuries old. So 20 years, it's probably unreasonable to expect changes within 20 years.
Not starting 1994, 95.
I don't have data from 95, but yes. The data are from 2004, but the
73rd Amendment was pretty much in place.
Yeah, exactly. And in these 2 states, they were from 1994. So in a sense, it's more than 20 years, but it's not, at least the data doesn't show for these 20 years as well. Okay. Overview of results. Okay, done. Okay. Broadly now, let's get into the theoretical expectation. So there is this classic argument being made that one of the important aspects of any democratic state is to develop a supply of democratically elected readers, right? Competent elected readers. And in that sense, reserve seat quotas mechanically change the identity, right? By virtue of implementing the policy, you see that improvement in leaders. So what are we trying to understand here? There's a main quantity of interest that we are looking at is what is the consequence of replacing a male leader with an equivalent female leader? So at the heart of the question here is what happens when we do this? Like I've just mentioned now, this transformation has long been expected to kind of drive some very, very substantial foundational societal changes, right? Reducing statistical discrimination, reducing taste-based discrimination, which is a kind of a very strong argument, leading to policy shifts. And again, these policy shifts can happen at the horizontal level. They can be upstream, downstream. Literature has looked at mobilization, which one can think of as a downstream consequence. Horizontally, people have seen, like we just discussed, where women kind of focus on more women-oriented issues in the same electoral body. And finally, expanding the pool of women in politics. That is, if you have more women in politics, you have more women who run for office, you have more women who mobilize and build these larger networks and lead to these goals, right? And another kind of understated but empirical reality in India, at least, is there is this massive convergence in voter turnouts where women and men are now voting in equal numbers, and in some cases women outnumber men in terms of turning out to the voting booth. Quotas technically can also drive these changes, right? So in that sense, if quotas work, you may eliminate the need for quotas in the future. Now, that doesn't mean quotas have to be removed completely. It means that these same tools can be used to empower other underrepresented groups, especially those at the intersection of these multiple cross-cutting disadvantages, or what is popularly called as these intersectionality effects, right? So you can kind of think about quota within quota or other kinds of mechanisms to improve representation of other groups, right? And in that way, the paper kind of looks at how do quotas achieve these kind of objectives that that quota policymakers and academics alike have thought that quotas would do. And coming to Ashu's question now, I'll get to the research design. So briefly, India has a three-tiered governance structure. There is the local government, there is the state government, and there is a national government. Quotas are implemented at the local government level. There was a recent change in the constitution where quotas are now slated to be implemented at the state and the national government level also. The paper is only about local levels. I'm happy to talk about that and the kind of the way quotas have been used for strategic, let's say quotas have been used strategically is a matter of discussion, which I'm happy to talk about at the end. The setting is, we are talking about the states of Rajasthan and Uttar Pradesh. There are, again, even within the local governments, there are like different tiers of governance. For the purpose of the presentation, I'll just briefly say that we are talking about Gram Panchayats. These are the most local forms of governance bodies. It's focused on Rajasthan and Uttar Pradesh, together about a population of about 300 million people. And we have data on elections from 2005 to 2020 for Rajasthan. For Uttar Pradesh, we have it for 3 electoral cycles. We do, that slide says it's 2020, it's 2015. We are collecting data for Uttar Pradesh also for the latest round of elections in 2021. But unfortunately, the data are not as clean as it should be. So I don't include that in the analysis. Happy to talk about that as well. Okay. Now, at the heart of it is the way in which quotas get removed, and I'll discuss how that happens here. Fascinating policy design for quotas in India is constitutionally it is mandated that quotas are implemented either via rotation or by a lottery. And this is the goal of at least the original constitutional amendments. Rationale for doing it is not fairness, but to ensure that everybody gets a female representative over time. So if you kind of follow a rotation or a lottery procedure, by chance, you will kind of get a lot, at least everybody over a long period of time will get at least one female representative. That's at least the original rationale. So the way lotteries work, suppose you have 16 single member districts or 16 seats. If there is 50% quota, by implementing quotas, you have 50% of these seats represented by women. Shikhar, you had a question.
Right. So just on your case selection, so Rajasthan and UP seem like the harder states for this to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So would you think of this as like a hard test, or there could be other cases where potentially there could be a persistence effect given more favorable baseline kind of socioeconomic? So what went into the thinking of these two states? Was it just data convenience, or was there
let's say right away Tamil Nadu versus
right? Exactly. Yeah.
He wants to talk about it.
No, I can happy to answer. There are 3 large reasons. One is the availability of consistent data over time, which is a very hard thing to obtain.
Yeah.
What was available for these 2 states. That's like the most instrumental reason. The second is in one sense, these are hard tests. So they kind of don't represent a baseline, so to speak. They're kind of the ceiling of sorts, if I'm saying that right, but one or the other, I have to think about that.
Mm-hmm.
The other is a lot of work in Rajasthan and others have shown kind of positive effects, right? And that's largely also driven by kind of, again, randomization gives a lot of leverage to make claims. But what has happened is in a lot of these places, it's focused on a district or like a handful of districts. So these 2 states provided us with this span. We do have, just for context, we have data on Uttarakhand, we have data on Kerala, we have data from Tamil Nadu. The issue with Kerala is Kerala does so many things well when it comes to data. They have forgotten to classify who was the president for the data from 2015. So we have data for 2010 and 20, but the middle election, we don't know what has happened. They only have the member results. So that's one reason why I'm not included, but we do have results, and it uniformly looks like it's the effects. Again, there could be, I cannot say more about Kerala, where there is high likelihood of this working more than other states, at least if our priors about how developmental trajectories have been in India. But again, I can't comment on it till then, but point very well taken. This is we can say this is a hard test, so to speak. I have some work on urban areas where the results are slightly different. The urban areas also, it's different as in urban areas are in some sense there are 200 electoral bodies. Information is much kind of easier to obtain, but it's remarkable how many urban bodies don't do elections on time, which is not the case in rural areas where elections regularly happen. For example, famously, Bombay has not had a municipal council for the last 4 years now. Bangalore has had one municipal election in the last 15 years. So in that sense, point very well taken. Yeah.
Can I also, another two-finger thing? Is that a motivation at all? The fact that in all probability, I'm not sure we can prove it in terms of the quantity or numbers of studies, but Rajasthan is probably the most studied state for local government.
Yeah.
It's interesting to speculate why that's the case, but it is, I think.
Yeah. So the classic Duflo paper, right, has a handful of districts from Bengal, and they have one district from Rajasthan.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of influence the paper has had is undeniable, but I think looking at the larger span is one of the advantages of the paper in that sense. But yeah, it's surprising UP is studied a lot for everything except municipal governance. Yeah. Because a lot of political scientists either do fieldwork in Bihar or in UP, as far as I know. Right, but
From the UP.
Oh, yeah, that's true. But it's not being looked at in this. Everybody here, at least that I know of, studies UP and Bihar. Yeah. Okay. So briefly, this lottery procedure is what mimics the removal of the quotas, right? So by virtue of it being a lottery, every district has a 50% chance of having a reserved seat next time or not. So the research design, therefore, this is a snapshot of elections across 4 cycles, right? And this has, I designed it in such a way that it has all possible combinations of interest to us. So if you look at grid cell 1 and 4, so 1 and 4 had no quotas in electoral cycle 1, 4-1 rather, right? 4-1 has a woman's reservation in second cycle. In the third cycle, it has no quotas again. I think I can use lights. Yes, this one. This is the grid cell I'm talking about, right? So in one sense here, there was no quota. Quota is introduced. And because of the random procedure, we can argue that quotas are softly removed temporarily, right? This is like, in one sense, in another paper, we use this term of a soft term limit. You're not term limited forever, but you're term limited at least for that election, at least on the gender dimension. Now, on the other hand, if you look at the cell 4-4, there is a quota here, quota in the second cycle, quota in the third cycle, and no quota in the fourth cycle. So this is what is an always treated. So they've always had quotas all the time, and only in the recent electoral cycle, quotas were removed. So this provides us with this nice design opportunity where, and this has been used by Bhavnani in the 2009 paper in Bombay, but Bhavnani looks at only 2 electoral cycles. So elections in 97 and 92. What the advantage that we have here is we see what happens because of dosage. Dosage is when you have more quotas, whether that results in an effect or not, right? Yes, Asha, you seem to have a question.
So now it should be clear to everyone that removal of quotas basically means at the village level. It's at the state level. That's not what we're saying. But there's a law, you can't remove quotas, right? But which village will get it? You're saying that it can lose it.
It's not even
But
a village, it's
how
a
long?
collection of villages.
No, the question then is every 5 years, the lottery is held.
Yes. So there is a bit of a like.
So in principle, my village, if I were a villager, my village could have a women's quota today. 5 years I lose it. For 10 years down, I also don't recover it.
Yeah.
And in 20 years, I have it only once.
Yes. So this actually was what motivated me into this.
Well,
because as I said, when I was training aspiring politicians, right, the conversations I had was there was a there was a couple, both of them were in the training institute to train how to kind of govern. The argument being made is my husband has been a representative of 10 years. And because of quotas now, quotas are being removed. That's why I'm stepping in. And there was no coercion, at least on the face of it, there was no coercion. It was a voluntary act where they wanted to preserve their constituency.
And it applies to other quotas as well, OBC quotas, SC quotas, or only women? I think must be to everything.
It's
right?
everything. Conditional on you having an SC quota, you are randomized to get a woman there. Conditional on you having an OBC quota, you are randomized to have a woman there.
Great for research.
So, Varun, could you say a little bit about how the theory is linking to the empirical design in this specific way, which is the theory is about quotas ending.
Mhm.
The empirics are more like risk smoothing, right? If you're someone who's standing in elections in one of these places and you know this institutional arrangement will come and go, then you're not designing your political kind of career around it ending and then life after that, but more like this is a temporary turbulence that I have to deal every now and then with. And therefore that in itself is a very different flavor from what your theory is about.
So that's a very valid question. So just to clarify here, what I'm interested in is to see, going back to the fundamentals of what quota is,
Right.
like when you see efficacious or effective leaders, you will probably elect them again. So this is, in one sense, this is a story from the voter side,
Regardless of whether the vote, the
quota status.
quota stays.
Yes,
Right.
If it's an able person, able
Yes.
to generate, so
you should be
she
able
might
to
continue.
continue, or you might elect them. So I have results on, but I
But
get
that political selection is not happening by the voter, right? Let's say it's husband and wife, the wife may be very capable, but
Yeah.
if the quota goes, the voter is not even getting a chance to say whether this. person is
precisely, and
correct.
that also kind of
Right.
gets at this heart of quota papers, which
Yeah.
have argued in favor that this will happen. So for example, Beeman et al.
Yeah.
A very iconic paper in the sense shows a 17% attitudinal shift.
Right.
Because of quotas, right? So that serves as a benchmark for us. So if 17% attitudinal shift is happening in 4 cycles, we should see a complete transformation of the society. I still agree that from a politician point of view, it's different. And I have a cheap way out here and also hopefully a cheeky way out. I have another paper which deals with that,
Great.
and I'm happy to talk about that. But that's a very valid, what are the politicians thinking? Then just to kind of give you a context here, it's on paper here, it's an individual decision to run. But my fieldwork and conversations suggest that parties always loom, but officially they don't have a party ticket, at least for these local elections. Urban bodies give us.
That depends on the state, or it's an all India?
It
It's-
depends on
it's
the state.
mandated
Depends
by
on
the
the state.
73rd,
It depends on the state.
on the state.
Bengal has partisan elections. Kerala has
does.
partisan
I
elections.
think UP has parties. No,
No,
The UP does not have
UP
parties.
and Rajasthan don't have parties.
No.
So
UP and Rajasthan both don't have
don't
parties.
have parties. So which is why we wanted to have the Kerala results. That way we could then kind of separate it by whether the communists or the Congress are doing things differently. We couldn't do it. But the point is that I have another paper though.
Okay.
Okay.
A quick
Yeah.
question. So this design is similar to the Bombay,
In a sense, it is similar. In a sense, yes, of course, like the removal is mimicked by the quota.
Right.
The way in which it is different is that we have more dosage and we can see the longest span. That's,
But Ricky got positive results in Bombay, right?
yes, that's again the benchmark from an urban. Again, I don't want to, it's an urban setting, a completely different setting. So that is one of the reasons why for the discrepant kind of findings that we have.
And is the party just the politics itself different? Are they
Yeah.
like more?
Stakes
this
are
the
higher.
idea of like husband, but what is it called?
Sarpanch Pati is the term.
Sarpanch Pati. That I'm guessing is not the case in Bombay.
Well,
Because it kind of like goes back to your question.
I have some insights on that. Like again, establishing that somebody is a Sarpanchpati is an incredibly empirically challenging task. So
Right,
we
yeah, of
only
course.
have suggestions about somebody's.
But yeah, but someone who's done fieldwork in
Yeah.
Bombay, do they find this
So I
idea
have
of-
information on Bombay. So at least for Bombay last 30 years, 20 years at least, we do find about 35 to 40% representatives having family ties, very strong family ties. Like a male relative was in power before the woman got elected. Drastically higher in rural areas, right? A lot of times in in urban areas, politicians are also very smart. They also know that this is a criticism that happens. So they also kind of have their shields up, so to speak, to kind of protect this particular information. For example, when I spoke to all political parties in Delhi, everybody says, we don't need quotas, we will anyway nominate women. which is categorically not the case. If you look at nominations at state levels, it is definitely not the case, but nobody will say that we don't nominate them. Similarly, I have scheduled a bunch of interviews with some elected representatives in Mysore right now, right? Where the popular perception is this person is definitely a kind of a sarpanchpati, it's not in the city context. So geez, let's talk to them to understand. Again, I don't have any information on that, but certainly that's the argument that one can make. It's like slightly there's this divergence in urban and rural India. I think still more work needs to be done, selfishly speaking, to kind of establish this, that there's certainly different across, but I think there are large reasons to believe that in the rural areas, this is much more prevalent. I have actually an example from pop culture reference also. If it enters TV, which means it probably is more legit. Is one.
I think it's what you're saying very consistent with the larger view and expectation based on that. That in city politics, especially metropolitan cities, while this idea would not be absent, the degree would be lower. So it's not 0 or 1, it's on 0 to 1 scale.
Yeah.
Right, whereas it's closer to 1 in our rural areas, and it's perhaps less than 0.5.
Yeah.
And right, between 0.5 and 0 in a city like Bombay.
Correct.
Right,
And
yeah.
that's
Which
true.
is not devoid of rural aspirations and rural ideas or family-based ideas, but it's going to be different kinds.
And parties are more actively involved. The stakes, money involved is much higher.
Of course.
And for what it's worth, in the other paper that I told you about, we actually find that without quotas, the representation levels will really tank, and we attribute it to voters as taste-based discrimination. Now, this is in a city like Bombay, so which kind of is, by all accounts, is a more liberal city in India than other places. So in one sense, it is kind of a not a very sobering kind of a result, so to speak. But yeah, I hope I have answered your question. Okay, so how do we estimate this? Straightforward. The dependent variable is the sex of the winner in the Gram Panchayat. Gram Panchayat is a collection of villages. So broadly speaking, I'll just go to the picture, that's easier. So what I look at is, I look at the sex of the winner in this open seat if it was reserved last time. That's the straightforward estimation procedure here.
But it's only forward in time.
Yeah.
Or is this comparison because mathematically you could even do it backward?
But I'd only forward in time, yes.
Only
Yeah. That's actually a good idea. Okay.
It's less than errors, basically, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you haven't looked at whether they were 2 terms of women.
I'd look at all of that, yes. I'll get to that. That's where I talk
It's not
about.
like a 0-1, but like 1.
For this first set of analysis, it's 0-1. And then for the next set of analysis, it's 1, 2, and 3 that you had two rounds of quotas, 3 rounds of quotas. I have looked at every combination and it just doesn't paint a good picture, unfortunately.
Whatever the criticism of the two-way fixed effects model with staggered rollout is these days, that applies to you.
No, it doesn't.
It
Because
doesn't.
here there is pure randomization.
I see.
And it's
Understood.
in that sense, identification is taken care of.
Right. So
I do want to highlight one thing though.
Yeah.
A lot of times, administratively, they say they have quotas.
Right.
When you actually dig into the data, you see there are discrepancies. For example, UP is famously does that for us, right? Not famously yet, but UP does that for us, where administratively the legislation was passed in 2006 that they'll have 50% quotas. You see all academic papers saying that 50% quotas are enacted since 2006 elections. If you look at the data itself, they don't enact 50% reservations in 2010. At least the data-wise, it doesn't tell us that that's happening. So there is some element of bureaucratic involvement here, which is concerning.
So, sorry, that's a compliance issue.
Compliance, not only, it's a compliance issue, yes,
So
sorry.
you're showing us an intent to treat effect that would just be inflated if it was adjusted for that.
I will say I'm showing you an ATE, but I'm willing to concede that it's intent.
It's fine.
Yes.
Yeah. The question I have is what is your level of randomization? It's a state, right?
No, the level of randomization at the GP level.
GP level.
Yes.
But because it is over time, that is why you are fixed affecting the GP.
Yes.
Okay.
And again, I'll talk about the data here, right? Can I just finish this if you don't mind? So we look at 4 different electoral sources of data. It's quite an annoyingly mammoth task, but what we do is we combine electoral data for both these states. We use local government directives because over 20 years, your definitions might change of the villages. Briefly, we account for all of this and we are only comparing those GPs that are appear consistently across. We can do any kinds of robustness checks on that, and we've done it, it still survives. And like I mentioned about randomization itself, again, randomization is crucial here because that is what is mitigating a lot of the concerns that you mentioned. If you look at the patterns of reservations, just construct a simple transition matrix, you see there's a negative correlation, which means that there is an element of rotation that's happening, not exactly pure randomization. So we do control for like pre-treatment covariates, and again, the results are consistent even when we do that. Okay. So briefly, we are analyzing the effect of, I spoke about all of those things when I was before showing you the slides, I apologize for that. So they analyze the effect of reserving a seat for women in the previous election cycle on their chances of winning the seat in the short term, because we know that in the past, a lot of literature has looked at immediate effects. And then we also, it's reasonable that these effects don't kick in one election term. So we look at the longer term effects. And another criticism is, or another potential thing is, well, quotas may not result in winners, but it may change the supply. So we may see more women winning for office, right? That's a reasonable thing. So we look at that as well. So short-term effects, what we do, we compare like I just showed you the research design. So we are comparing outcomes in 2010 based on reservation status in 2005, 15 based on 10, 20 based on 15. So that's basically year pairwise comparisons. So this is what it looks like. We do see a modest positive effect in Rajasthan, a similarly negative effect, remarkably similarly negative effect again in 2015, and then no effects in 2020.
One question. So modest meaning relative to what people have buying another.
I'm saying modest
Yeah.
based on the benchmark that we have.
Right,
Yes.
which is the 5 times from Bhavnani.
5 times from Bhavnani or 17 times attitudinal
Right.
switches in
In
Beeman.
Yeah.
But I have to kind of, when we go to Uttar Pradesh, we do see consistent positive effects in the short term, like about 1%. Now, 1% on a base of 14,000 is a lot of people. But again,
This
Yeah.
is on women winning.
yes.
Okay.
What's the outcome variable?
Outcome variable is whether the winner in the open seat is a man or a woman.
So it's not the same woman.
It need not be the same woman.
Yeah.
Because quotas, like if we look at same woman, it will be even. The outcome would be much smaller.
But can you do something like total votes polled by women?
I do
candidates
that.
or-
I will show you.
Or number of women candidates?
I do that also.
Also, so 2015 is when Vasundhara Raje won the election, right?
I believe yes.
13.
Yes.
So you have some like party-based difference, at least in Rajasthan, that could potentially.
That is something that we thought about.
Yeah.
We unfortunately, because on paper these elections are supposed to be non-partisan, but it is not. We know that it is not. Unfortunately I don't have any indicator or information on the involvement of parties. So we could always it would be great to see what happens when Mayawati was the chief minister versus.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
Like Thibaut, a lot of these comments Thibaut is gonna probably go into, so maybe we should lessen the comments during so we can have a
Okay, yeah,
more robust
okay.
discussion. Yeah.
All right. So short-term implications, quotas have limited or no impact on the probability of women winning the elections when they are temporarily removed. This is different from Bhavnani, who demonstrate a positive representational effect, at least a large positive effect in urban India.
In
As-
Bombay.
In Bombay, yeah. Now, once again, it is probably unreasonable to expect positive effects in one electoral cycle. So what we do therefore is like the question that you had earlier, where we look at what happens over time. This is what is known as the, if like reservations in 5, 10, and 15, what do we see in 2020? And we also look at whether there are nonlinear effects and linear effects, right? Again, there is absolutely no positive consequence. In fact, we can also kind of mildly argue that it is not creating a self-sustained cycle of representation, but there is a removal of quotas may result in like if you look at the number here, the baseline is 11%, right? So which means if you remove quotas, there'll only be 11% women in office. So there is a high probability of for gains made in numeric representation being eroded over time, which is actually a quite troubling finding because we know in the literature that it is important to have a critical mass of representation for you to have tangible policy consequences. So this, in that sense, which is one of the reasons why we, in our conclusion also, we say that quotas are the starting point, but it is actually an essential tool to improve representation, but then its effects probably are different than what literature says. Can I just finish this one second? Sorry. Okay, so what does this mean? I think what this means is that we probably have to kind of look at an in-depth examination of underlying causes of representation. A lot of times we kind of, a lot of research and a lot of political talk also revolves around quotas as the only political tool, which is, there are reasons why that is happening, but I think we kind of think that there is a lot of other things also that should happen in tandem with this. Again, we don't have a policy prescription per se, but at least that's what we think. And to come to Shikhar's question on candidacy, we look at the effect on proportion of women running. We look at the number of women running. We look at the vote share of the top two. We only have data on the top two, but that covers about, we see nothing. There's no improvement. So in one sense, this also kind of, I got this one question when I presented, where are open seats considered as men's seats? At least you have reservations. Why do you need to run in an open seat? It is men's seat. The answer to that is it's not. It's an open seat, technically speaking, but there is, I don't have any evidence to show that people are thinking that way, but it increasingly looks like it's perceived that way. Okay. So in summary,
Show us Rajasthan, did you show UP also, the long term?
I
They don't have
have it,
2020
I already
data.
have too many tables, so I have it, put it in my appendix. I can show it to you.
Yeah.
Again, no long-term effect in UP
I
also.
see, UP also. But UP you don't have 2020 yet, so you're
Not yet.
discussing 2015.
15, yes.
Based on 2.5 and
And 10,
2.10.
yes. Yeah.
I'll come back to the question.
Okay. So data conclusively shows that gender quotas have little effect on women's chances of winning power after removal. Not just winning, we also don't see an effect on women running for office. And also, we also do one very kind of a not very stringent condition where we look at even if one woman ran, do we see a significant effect? Again, we don't see that. The baseline is large because in 40-45% you have at least one woman running, but there is no quota treatment effect on that. Okay, so it's good. It's like fine to say that something is not working, but why is it not working is probably a more interesting question. So what we do is again, like I said, we are focusing on the consequences of replacing a male leader with an equivalent female leader. And the effectiveness of this by way of quotas is partly based on changing opinions after observing effective women leaders in power. The second is the reserved seat winners are perceived as qualified for office. Again, perceptions here are based on various things. And finally, exposure leading to like updation of voter beliefs, right? Now, there is literature which shows that exposure to women actually results in a backlash against women also, but they could go either way. So in that sense, we kind of want to look at what is happening. So what we are thinking of is who is wielding power? That's an important question. And this is actually a screenshot from if you've not watched it, I think you should watch it. It's a TV show called Panchayat on Amazon. This is actually, you don't even have to watch the entire series. This is in the first episode. It comes in the first 10 minutes. So the perception is, at least in popular media, and in literature also, right, is that there is this male capture of power that is happening. So this is, and a lot of people have identified this, even Duflo in 2004 identifies this. In fact, says that this is not without reason because they have reasons to believe that this is happening. So what is happening is there is a constitutional mandate. So people are adhering to the mandate, but not letting go of power. That's the thing here. This criticism is not new or not unique to India. It's actually used in Argentina. I don't want to pronounce Spanish because I'll mess it up. It's basically women of a man, which is roughly the same. If this is indeed true, the hypothesized benefits of quotas are not being accrued because women are actually not getting a chance to govern. Now, if that is the case, then we need not see the hypothesized benefits of quotas, right? But this is an incredibly hard to measure. And this is not only quantitatively, but even conceptually. Men are never called proxies. women are always called proxies, at least when people define it or people when they're describing media reports. So it's an incredibly challenging task. So we would like to say that these are suggestive results that we have. Again, I've in the past used indirect measures. In India, you have what is known as the PAN card, which tells you your economic activity or degree of your economic activity. We've used that as a proxy for proxy candidates. People recently have used local informant surveys. Just ask people, what do you think about your elected representative? Another potential strategy is to ask neighboring GPs whether they think the other GP is a proxy candidate or not. Again, we have not done that. Here, we think we've developed a kind of a neat measure to kind of identify the nature of proxy, which is just simply call them. So what we did was we contacted 500 randomly sampled quota seat winners, only in women's seats, directly with the purpose of asking them very basic questions of how many meetings are held? Do you attend meetings? What is happening? And we saw something remarkable, right? So we had, of the 500 people we've called, about 3/4 answered the phone, which is very, very encouraging. And this is also in line with my at least experience with how governance in India happens, where a lot of it is on WhatsApp and phone. So a lot of times people are expected to be responsive on the phone. And a startling number of them, phone calls were answered by non-members. Like, it's remarkable how many times we had their sons or their spouses answering the phone. And then again, if you think about this, this is a funnel. This is a funnel of how many people we called, who responded, what's the member gender. Again, this was done in Hindi. So a lot of times it's easy to infer based on how they speak. So again, gender for our purposes is just male and female in this case. 96% of non-members answering our calls were men. And they were mostly
Men and boys.
Men and boys, yes. Most of them were spouses. A large 50-60% were spouses. Father-in-laws, sons. I'll get to one very stark instance. We asked them, will you please transfer the call to the elected representative? 80% did not want to do that. And they had various reasons. Some of it is legitimate, but 72% of them just did not want to do it. And but we were in an awkward position where we had to complete the conversation. So we asked them, well, do meetings happen? Does that? And they answered it. They answered it like they were the representatives. There were a couple of instances where we had a father-in-law respond to the phone, and we asked them, can we talk to the elected representative? The father-in-law is, no, I'm the elected. They may be elected, but I am their leader. So talk to me. Tell us.
So not only the husband, your father-in-law also.
In some instances, they were fathers-in-law as well, yes.
And the boys, the sons also.
The sons often were answering the phone and telling us that they are not here. A lot of times they said they are illiterate, so please talk to me. That was also used to yeah.
2 questions. So, is there a way to distinguish between candidate effects and gender effects? So I'm thinking about constituencies where the woman has run multiple times. And do we have data on when the second time there is a quota, is the same woman winning?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting thing. We wanted to do that. The issue is, in Indian administrative data, names are written. So if you've seen my name, you can imagine the number of spelling mistakes that can have. But even with relatively simpler names, there are a lot of errors. So for example, there is Manju Devi and there is a Majnu Devi. Probably they are the same. Machine would probably code it as the same, but are they the same? We don't know. And it's very hard to do that. That's something which we want to do.
It's very unlikely for someone to have a Majnu Devi.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
Laila Devi, one can understand.
This is a very stark example, but yes, I agree. Majnu is
This is just clearly a mistake, right?
Unlikely
that I have never met anyone, and I've spent a lot. Lailas I have met, but Majnu Devis.
But the point being, that's
No, I understand that.
So, but we want to do that. We do have names. The challenge is sometimes they switch constituencies because you can run on a neighboring GP. So it poses, again, even if we do estimate it, we'll not be confident in our estimation, at least as of now, but we are thinking of ways to do it. But knowing that in India and in many developing countries, the rerunning or your rate of re-election is so low, there is a lot of turnover is expected.
Even in local body.
Again, that's the knowledge base that we have. Again, to show it in my data, I would have to figure out how to fix the name issue, but that's something that I don't have information on.
Village level, maybe we know, you may be right about the urban. We don't know, but there's perhaps a greater chance. Okay.
Varun, could you run it in a way where if this constituency does not have quotas now, what is the impact of the percentage of female candidates in all the neighboring
Yeah,
constituencies?
that's something that we are doing right now.
Okay.
So the spillover in the other, like look at the same district, but other.
Because like
GPs.
the most profitable institutional response would be to basically swap and keep
Yeah.
swapping. So you maintain control over both. I don't know if this is the case, but then
No,
you
yeah,
would not have.
it's possible that that was happen, and again, it's an empirical question which we have to look at, right? Okay,
And second question, is there data on a woman's close relative being a politician?
which in theory, yes, very hard to obtain though, but we do have, at least for Rajasthan, no, we do have it for Bihar. No, we have it for Rajasthan. We have ration card data. So with ration, in your ration card, you will have
The name?
everyone. It will be an incredibly monumental task to do it, but doable. Where pick up the ration card number, or pick up the ration card, fix the name, figure out who the relatives are, and see if that person appears on the list. We have not done it, but certainly doable. So what does this phone survey indicate? It is a lack of agency that quota winners seem to have, at least when it comes to responding to kind of citizen inquiries, because we posed as a citizen, so it's a citizen inquiry kind of a thing. So men may become unintended beneficiaries of these quota policies, which is very unceremoniously called as a proxy in a lot of situations, or even the sarpanch pati, and that's a term that people used on the field also. So I'm comfortable using with sarpanch pati here, right? This also partially explains why we see limited increase. If women are not governing, why would that change opinions of the people? So that's one thing that could be at play here, right? Second, as I said, right, the estimate of interest is replacing a male leader with an equivalent female leader, but it kind of induces a complex treatment, right? It changes the characteristics of candidates. And a lot of times, candidate quality is operationalized through their age. Like the older you are, the more experienced you are, number of children, your graduation status, your unemployment, the number of assets you have. And we see very significant differences between gender quota and non-gender quota winners, right? Where we do see that non-gender quota seats have much richer people running, very, very low levels of self-declared unemployment. Now, you may say that declaring unemployment status is influenced by gender norms. Men very rarely say they are unemployed in India. But these are sworn affidavits that we are talking about, which is the best extent to which we can talk about. But there is, and we not only did this for winners, we did this for candidates also. If anything, we see that winners are slightly better than candidates, but on average, we see that there is a large difference between quota seat and non-quota seat winners and candidates. We also split this by caste category, open seats, SC/ST seats. Again, it's similar. So along these dimensions, which are perceived to kind of be important or kind of significant in perceptions, it appears that candidates are weaker. Am I doing okay on time, or?
I think you should just keep going.
Okay.
Yeah, and maybe we'll wrap.
I think I just have to conclude.
Perfect.
Now, the question was.
Entertain any questions now until you finish.
Yeah.
Okay. So dosage, right? So the data, the length and the span of the data allows us to look at what happens due to intensity of treatment, or what happens when you get multiple doses of quotas. Observing effective women has the potential to reduce statistical discrimination, because there's like very classic literature on this, that more information softens people's attitudes and aspects like that. So sustained exposure to quotas, we find that they are not increasing the election of women in open seats. Hearteningly, we don't see any evidence for backlash. Backlash would be, you see a massive negative effect in open seats. We don't see that. But there is work which suggests that there could be backlash against women in other spheres, not necessarily electoral. So we don't want to make too strong claims, but at least representationally, we are not seeing backlash effects. Okay, in conclusion, local gender quotas, in rural areas at least, do not increase women's representation when removed. We don't see any effect on candidacy either. And we kind of looked at three potential mechanisms. The first was male gatekeeping, that is, men become the unintended beneficiaries, specifically male relatives. Candidate characteristics, along dimensions that are perceived to be important or salient in terms of candidate attributes, gender quota seat winners seem to be weaker. Dosage doesn't seem to have had an effect so far. Having said that, there is clear evidence that quotas are providing a democratic entry channel for women, because without quotas, like we saw in the long run effects, the gains in even numeric representation are at risk. So it's kind of the gains of numeric representation are at risk, but the paper wants to highlight the fragility of these gains, because in one sense, these are mechanical effects, right? So I want to reiterate, the de jure policy compliance is actually not trivial, because a lot of times we see, like I just mentioned, in many urban areas, you don't even see elections. So it is a important, although a mechanical effect. And self-sustaining cycles, we still think that self-sustaining cycles are possible. That is, if like our phone survey indicated, if men are not governing, but women actually get to govern, there is a potential that it can change. There is another kind of underlying aspect here that we may need much longer exposure, because quotas have been in place, at least our data is for 20 years, but like we discussed, quotas have been in place since the 90s, and in some places, even since 1989 in Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh. So, but discriminatory attitudes are like centuries old. So it's probably unfair to think about dosage being enough here. In conclusion, I think there is a need for deeper examination of underlying causes of representation, because, and literature has said this, and if you follow Indian media now, this is something that is very, very politically salient, where demand for quotas actually overshadows a lot of other strategies. Not saying that it is unimportant, all I'm saying is it's a starting point and not an end in itself. And finally, there's a very nice article by Nani Vadekar, I'm really mispronouncing this Marathi name, where the argument being made is, in some sense, an institutional transformation is relatively easy. You can ramrod it in the parliament if you want, if you have the numbers. But concrete attitudinal change is something that is harder. So I think that's something that I'd like to highlight in conclusion. Thank you.
Great, great presentation, and we have a good amount of time for discussion. Sorry to stop some people from asking questions, but keep hold of them because we'll open up to a broader Q&A. And I hope to hear from you all. This was fascinating.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for presenting. So we have Thibaut Marseille, who will give us some comments. And then, we'll give you maybe a couple minutes to respond to some of it, or sort of engage in a bit of a discussion, and then we'll open up to broader questions. So, keep your questions noted down.
I might add that Thibaut studied local government in UP intensively, and his book manuscript has been accepted by my city, Oxford University Press recently. Should be out whenever he.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Well, thank you for inviting me to discuss the paper and giving me an opportunity to read it. I really enjoyed it. Varun, I think it's a great paper, well researched, well written, and obviously reaches a very sobering conclusion. I just wanted to, I'm not going to summarize that, sort of reemphasize the findings, but there's a couple of contributions which I think are really interesting and which I'll come back to towards the end of my comments. The first is obviously that formal institutional change may only partly achieve its goal, right? So by facilitating descriptive representation, but not achieving meaningful substantive representation, something you mentioned in the paper. The other thing here, the other sort of like main takeaway is that the implementation of affirmative action itself is perhaps at this point the only way to promote the inclusion of women in leadership structures at the local level, specifically in these two states, Rajasthan and Uttar Pradesh. So I want to say, I really, so I'm going to say there's two types of comments on the sort of framing and some of the things that you discuss in the paper, and then I have one comment on the methodology. I want to say that I guess the big, the sort of like elephant in the room is patriarchy here. And what I wonder is, maybe you didn't have the space to discuss this, and I don't know. And to me, this is obviously a case of, Pardaka Panchayat, and it would be really interesting to know what exactly are the psychological underpinnings of this, right? So yes, this is patriarchy, but what is really sort of like, making sort of like the male relatives preempt those leadership opportunities and shape the way the quotas are being implemented. I think it would be really interesting. I don't know if you have the data, especially because we know we have all this data on the relationship in quotas in public goods provision from 20 years ago, from Duflo and Chattopadhyay, and other work that has looked at the impact on the politics of distribution at a local level. So it'd be really interesting to see what is really happening. What I think here, I think this sort of, Shekhar is the one who hinted at that, and I think this is really important here. The quotas, I mean, from what I remember, I was actually in UP in 2015 during the Panchayat elections. And from what I remember from discussions with candidates and local elected officials was that, in a way, the quotas are seen as a business opportunity. And that's partly the problem here, right? So they're not perceived as a way to empower people, as they are seen as a way to sort of give someone in the village community in the Panchayat an opportunity to make money, right? Because unfortunately, it does happen often that, those local elected officials sort of like work, develop a relationship with the bureaucracy, and in the process sort of increase their personal wealth. And so this goes back to the idea, I think you mentioned the term risk smoothing, and I think for a lot of these families, because I want to use the term families here and not like female candidates, this is really seen as an opportunity to, partake in the fruits of local government, right? So I think this is something that should be mentioned. And this is related to what I was just saying. What struck me when I was doing my field work almost 10 years ago now is that the quotas were never questioned by the people I talked to, which I thought was really interesting. So no, I heard comments on local elections, all those local elections, it's a waste of money. Look at all the electioneering happening, the distribution of cash handouts, all this money could be spent on other things, right? But no one ever said anything about the quotas themselves. The quotas shouldn't exist or shouldn't be implemented. So I wonder here if there's not something you could sort of perhaps emphasize in the, again, you may not have the space for that. The other thing that's missing, no one has actually brought this up in the question so far, it's caste and the interaction between gender and caste. And so in the case of UP, I have done work, so most of my work is on UP, and I've worked with all the data from the election commission for 20, so I'm only looking at the elections, Panchayat elections of 2010 and 2015. But the data provided by the election commission of UP is disaggregated by caste and gender, by gender and caste. So it'd be interesting to see whether those, the same mechanisms that you identify, I assume that they would work probably the same way, but I anticipate that there might be a bit of a difference in the magnitude of the effect. Why do I say this? Because when I was doing interviews with candidates in Gram Panhans in 2015, I did actually, so I had the exact same experience of male gatekeeping. I went through, so all the information, the personal information for those pradhans is available online. So you have all the numbers are actually accurate. And when you call, so you look at a number for a female Gram Panhan, and then when you call, you almost inevitably, I mean, this was my experience, it was really striking, you would almost inevitably talk to the uncle, the husband, the son, the father-in-law, et cetera, right? But what I thought was interesting is that in some places, I was able to meet with the female pradhan, and those female pradhans were all from the quote-unquote forward castes. They were either Brahmin or Kshatriya, which I thought was very interesting. I was never able to meet with a female pradhan from the scheduled caste. In many cases, what I found was that it was not just male gatekeeping, but it was also high caste gatekeeping. So there were a lot of villages in which I went. I was looking for a SC female pradhan, and I would almost inevitably talk to the local landlord who would tell me, well, she's technically my maid, so I'm doing the panchayat work on her behalf, right? I even went to a village in which the reservation had been announced. And so the village was supposed to be reserved for women SC, and there were literally two Thakur families basically fighting on behalf of SC families who work their land, right? So the caste story here, I think, would be really interesting. It would be really, I don't think this would fundamentally undermine your results.
I have some thoughts on that, so
But it would probably give us a sense of how bad it is, in a way, conditional on the caste status. I think this is really, this would be really, really interesting. And again, for UP, you have the data. I mean, and I can share it with you because I've coded everything manually, I should say. And that was quite something, but I have the data because the files that the Election Commission provides do disaggregate the data by gender and caste. So what I want to say, the other big comment I had, which is more of a, so moving away perhaps from the sort of like framing, is something that you sort of touched on at the very beginning of your presentation, and I don't think you have any answers, like where do we go from there, right? So when I read this, my first reaction was, oh, this is really sad and depressing. But at the same time, this is a big deal. The fact that about half of 250,000 gram panchayats across India are reserved for women is a huge deal. This is what I tell my students when I introduce the theme of local government and quotas of descriptive representation. In and of itself, it's a huge win, right? So where do we go from there? In the sense of, how do we make those opportunities, leadership opportunities, truly sort of empowering, truly meaningful, or meaningfully empowering, I guess is one way to put it. I don't know if there's any kind of social engineering that can be done beyond just the reservation of quotas at the Gram Panchayat level. There might be some work to be done perhaps at the block level, even the district level, to get to sort of like facilitate collective action among women, among female elected officials. And again, I mean, the other obvious answer here is that there's only so much social engineering that can be done, in the sense that we know that a lot of those attitudes towards women change when the sort of like underlying socioeconomic conditions indeed change. And those underlying social conditions in rural India have changed, but perhaps not in a way that would sort of change perceptions of female leadership at the local level, or even at the national level for that matter. One thing I want to say also, so on the method, I don't have, so I had the same reaction when I read the paper about the selection of states, because to me, I mean, both states are extremely, I mean, when I think of patriarchy in India, I think of Rajasthan and UP, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I see where you're coming from. I mean, when I literally, right? These are the two states I can think of immediately. So I think it would be really interesting to see what happens when you compare one of these two states with perhaps a state in Eastern India or Southern India, where maybe the sort of like where patriarchal norms are not nearly as strong. I mean, they would be still strong, I think, I assume, but like probably not nearly as strong. And the thing I want to say about UP, and you're going to have to tell me more about this, is that my assumption from when I was there was that the award of quotas was not randomized. So you mentioned as if random in the paper. I've never come across any kind of documentation saying that this was indeed a lottery. And when I was there, I actually, because I was there in the whole of 2015, and so I was there just before the elections. The elections took place in November or December of that year, but I was there in September, and I met people working for the Election Commission who were doing what they were calling the rapid survey, right? So they were basically they were sampling a number of villages and looking at the evolution of the population at the Gram Panchayat level. And my understanding at the time, and I could be wrong, was that the decisions made by the Election Commission to award reservations to Gram Panchayats was only made based on that assessment of population growth. But again, you may have information that I don't have. In my book, I've been extremely cautious. So I've not, because I do diff and diff as well, because I'm looking at the impact of the reservation status on outcomes under NRGS, right? But I'm not treating this as a natural experiment or, with as if random assignment of reservation status, which by the way may not be a big deal. I mean, you would have to tweak the language, obviously, and you might find yourself comparing two states that have a different approach to awarding quotas. And you could be in a position to say, well, we find this in a state where there is an actual lottery. I think Rajasthan is almost certain to do the lottery thing, I think, from what I understand.
Can you say just a bit more on how UP
So,
decided?
when I was there, my understanding was, and I've actually touched base with a number of people to get confirmation of this, but my understanding is that this was done based on an assessment of population shifts, which is also what informs redistricting at the local level, at the Gram Panchayat level. So every 5 years, there's a level of redistricting that takes place. So Gram Panchayats whose population has increased too much will be broken up. And the assignment, my understanding is that the assignment of a reservation status is not random the way you are telling us it is, right? Again, I don't think it's a huge deal because it's still very interesting to study because you're really looking at the sort of heterogeneity in outcomes, and that's very very interesting in itself. But I don't know whether you can actually make that claim.
Also, statistically, it may not matter.
It may not matter all that much.
It may not matter if the officials are not deciding it in a very discriminatory basis through the state.
So what I also
Right through
heard,
the state, right? So in one, two.
If
In
they're
some there
assigning,
is some
if they're
discrimination,
assigning-
the other way, yeah.
if they're assigning it to districts that have a proclivity to elect women, then it's a problem. But I have some notes on that.
because what I also remember, and this is not something I witnessed, but I heard when I was there, was that there was a way for people at the Gram Panchayat level to bribe local officials at the district level through the district magistrate's office to have a more favorable quote unquote treatment in terms of reservation assignment. Because obviously members of the high caste prefer the Gram Panchayat not to be awarded to any specific group, right? Because you see this, it's very obvious, and again, I'm going back to the issue of caste. When a Gram Panchayat is open, that makes it far more likely that a male member of the local Brahmin or Thakur community will indeed run and win.
This actually, this suggests that if you can also tell us how Dalit reservation and or OBC reservation is practiced.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, I think maybe
Can I
it's the
respond?
same way,
I think one, basically the statistical test for this would be, if it is happening the way it is supposed to happen, there would be a certain probability distribution.
Yeah.
For very people.
Yeah.
If there is a difference, like some KL distance measure is different, then and statistically significantly, so the reason to believe that there is plausibly arbitrary but not random assignment.
Exogenous.
Exogenous.
But if you have confirmation of this, let me know, because I can put that in my book, and then jackpot, amazing. So,
Sure.
but I've erred on the side of caution, because I was just very worried that this might be a problem. That's all I have.
Okay, can I
Thank
respond
you.
quickly?
Yes, let's
Okay.
do, just, a couple
Quickly,
of
yeah,
comments,
okay.
And then we'll take, if you wanna be on the list, I'll just take down the list.
Okay, thank you, and I'd love to see all of your comments if you can share. with me.
Yes.
First thing is, we wanted to do a survey, proper full-blown survey of the representatives. At some point, if there is this trade-off between finishing the paper versus adding more, so we are in that juncture now, whether we want to add more or whether we just have to submit it. We are not really sure, but that's we want to kind of understand this. Quota as a business opportunity for families. So in I have another paper where we actually kind of do this, where we have family information, where what we treat is if a family, treat the entire family as a unit. And if they are ruling, whoever from the family is elected, treat that as one electoral term. That's something that we can think about, because that's my experience also, because it is kind of thought of as a family enterprise in a lot of these places. Quotas are never questioned. I'm glad you mentioned that, because in my book, I'm actually exploring this theme where a lot of times we see that whenever there is So in the 90s, we still don't know why gender quotas came into being in India. There are many hypotheses there. One, people say there's the Beijing Convention, there were international norms. There's one more thing. This is at the same time when Mandal was being implemented. So on the one hand, you empower other groups, and on the other, you say we bring in gender quotas. And the entire 90s, I've gone through the parliamentary debates in detail. People were opposed to quota within quota. CPIM leaders, they go, no, we don't need quota within quota because Lalu Yadav benefited. So women from other castes will also benefit. Well, clearly it is, I think there are reasons to doubt that. So there is the strategic use. Prime Minister Modi calls a special session of the parliament and says, I'm implementing quotas. If you read the fine print, the quotas cannot be implemented till the redistricting is done, which they know is a very politically contentious issue. And parallels a rise in the demand for reservations for other backward communities, right? So in that sense, there is the strategy. There is a literature which argues about the strategic use of quotas to signal or maximize electoral support. So I think there is some of that also. Again, I'm still developing that idea. In terms of caste, there's a famous Black feminist literature on this. That's a very nice title. If you, the title tells you everything you need to know, which is all the men are black, all the women are white. Some of us choose to be brave. Like this is a Black feminist anthology talking about how how Black women are at the intersection of these identities, right? I have a paper which shows in Delhi that we do see that in Delhi, it's an urban setting. So in an urban setting where a lot of popular perception is caste doesn't exist, we actually kind of show that these quota seats are dominated by upper caste. Even in this case, I don't see why it should be different. I would love to get the caste data if that is shareable, of course. That will be great.
Transcribed everything.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. The second thing is when you spoke about economic, socio-demographics, which is a valid point. A common criticism for men in India is they appear poor on paper because everything is in the family's name. But assets data shows us that's not the case. Women are also significantly poorer than their other counterparts. So there is definitely socioeconomics that is at play.
But that's based on their own individual
self-declared affidavit
right?
assets.
Okay.
I have cash also and land and others.
Okay.
So this I showed only what they call as non-liquid assets, but I have liquid assets as well. Case selection, looks like there is a reason to add Kerala now in spite of the data limitations. We will definitely add it because I have done the analysis for Uttarakhand or Uttaranchal and Kerala. It doesn't again at least
Kerala that shows what?
it's similar Kerala also. Again, but then we don't have data in between, and I've not done it in the recent past, so I've forgotten. I also have to check again. Just one second. Finally, UP randomization. My co-author and I have discussed this ad nauseum now. On paper,
Please tell me that
it is said that it is done based on population size. You're right there.
Yeah.
It is as if random because once there's a threshold and then there is as if randomization.
Okay.
No two consecutive elections though.
Yeah.
If you need a reference, appendix table in Rachel's JOP.
Yeah.
Okay. However, in UP, they say they do a lot of things on paper, but in the data, it appears completely different. So to your point, that's what we're doing is therefore to mitigate some of these concerns, we merged our entire thing with Shrug. So we now have baseline covariates. So we control for those baseline covariates because we have reasons to believe that there is something happening which is not pure randomization.
Sorry, you have covariates. So are those covariates jointly predictive of assignment?
Yeah.
They are.
No, they're not. If they are, then I can't use it. They are not. Yeah. No, I've done a thorough balance test of that also. No, there is. I think of the 50 or 60, we have about 6 or 7 that that's individually predicted, not.
But you can just look at the F statistic of that.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's not predicted.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's something that we will do, which is why if you notice in the language for Uttar Pradesh is also very, we are very cautious when we don't want to say it's random because with data wise,
For sure, it's not a lottery.
Yeah, it's not a lottery for sure.
Yeah.
Rajasthan, academic literature says it's random. We have very strong reasons to believe 2005-10 is definitely random. Then there is some amount of rotation that kicks in, which is why we control and we kind of. The one thing, therefore, is the precision of the null is very high. So even adding covariates also is just blowing up the standard errors rather than changing anything. So that's something that gives us more confidence.
Okay.
Great,
Okay.
so let's do comments. Ashu, want to start us off?
On the Kerala question, maybe it's more helpful to see where Nayars dominate.
Mhm.
Because female-dominated families.
Yep.
Quite common, all of us have met that, right? Their husbands living in wives' houses and
Yeah.
family, other than the other way around. So, right, so it may be, since Nayars are about 20-21%, or somewhere there of Kerala, you should be able to get some variation within Kerala as a way to. think
Definitely,
about
yeah.
it. And I think, and since you have Kerala data, so it should be not so hard. I don't know whether you have anything from the Northeast where also gender norms are quite different.
We don't have a lot from Meghalaya.
Meghalaya in particular, but yeah. Huh?
Unfortunately, we don't have Karnataka because coastal Karnataka, the the matrilineal societies are very common there as well.
Which community would have matrilineal societies in Karnataka?
The people who speak Tulu.
The people who speak Tulu.
No, it's matriarchal, it's not, it's matrilineal.
Sorry.
I speak Tulu.
Yeah.
And also Meghalaya. Meghalaya's representation of legislator is just, I think we have a recent, yesterday we had a session with Meghalaya legislators, almost all of them were men.
Yeah.
So it's matrilineal, it's not matriarchal.
Yeah.
I'm 100% sure Kerala doesn't show any improvement. I think across India, it's just the same social norms, it's just the men holding power.
I think even in
But it's worth checking the Nair dominated areas, right? Worth checking.
It's
nonetheless.
because
It may- you will be right.
Yeah, I come from coastal area in Karnataka. I speak Tulu, and I also, like my family, like we pray to our mother gods and our fathers, so we don't have anything related with our fathers.
I
so-
see.
But it's very patriarchal.
Ashwita, you should introduce yourself also. I feel like everyone should introduce themselves before they start.
Yeah. Introduce yourself.
Yes, so I'm Ashwita, I'm doing my mid-career master's in public administration
I see.
here at Harvard Kennedy School. I am not an academic, I have no research background, but I am very, very interested in politics. I have worked as a political consultant in Tamil Nadu,
I see.
and then I was really interested because even in political spaces like political consultancy, there are literally no women. We are just, I think 10-15 women out of 400 men who are in almost fields working. So I was really fascinated. So I took a break for a year and then did the same, but not like you. But I just went around in villages. I worked with a member of parliament called Kanimuli Kartanvi, asked her whether I can interview women panchayat leaders. So I did interview 100 women panchayat leaders. I did a survey and then I did a very qualitative, and I met a lot of women who are from scheduled caste. I think one of the things which I really was like even women said that we do not want to lead because our men has worked so hard for it. So when there is a quota, because in Tamil Nadu we have rotational thing. So basically if a woman gets a quota, she will get it one more year. So it's 2 years. So the rationale behind it is like you will lead one time, so you will get equipped so that you will lead next time, so you will get more power. But that doesn't happen because women believe that men has worked all their lives for that political power. And when it is given to a woman, she doesn't want to lead. And especially for, like for example, scheduled caste and scheduled tribe backgrounds, but these women are not allowed to sit in the panchayat office. They are just literally namesake. Like there is, it is heartbreaking when you speak to these women, and especially Muslim women as well. Muslim women also do not hold any representation, which like when I interviewed these women, they were like, oh, do you want chai? That's the only conversation I've had with them. Nothing about what is the population of the panchayat, what are the issues in the panchayat. All of them were replied by men. So basically what I'm just finishing, what we are trying to do in Tamil Nadu is that we have started a women's collective 1.5 years back. So in 2026, we are 100 women want to run for office in political office, so that we can change this narrative of saying like, okay, as young women, we want to hold office. We want to have that agency to take decisions for the village.
Well, thank you very much. Very useful.
But I do have the data, I do have the stories of these women. I literally wrote down because I presented to the member of parliament. I think caste is a very sensitive subject. Nobody wants to take any decision on that. We did a capacity building session with panchayat leaders. Almost 300 of them came to one place, but we couldn't continue the journey because of course it's volunteering. Politics doesn't have money. I have to look for a job. So I joined as a
So that was, I'm glad this led to this conversation, but there is a theoretical point here. And I hope you know what, I suppose you know, what Ambedkar's argument was about why there should not be local government in India. Yeah?
Yes,
So
The dense
Mother
of-
Khosla has small pieces. I'm
Yeah.
researching this now. That there should be a full-length paper before long, a couple of years. But Mother, and I had guessed it. I mean, I didn't go through the Constituent Assembly debates myself, but now I have somebody who's going through that for. But Mother Khosla's book, what's it called? On the Constitution, has a section on it, very important section. Ambedkar basically said that, yes, indeed, yeah, if you go to the local level.
I've read this.
Yeah, it's a great book.
Ambedkar basically argued that it is going to make the situation, he didn't say not any better for Dalits of the village, but actually worse. Why? Because the socio-economic power of the upper castes and the landlords will now be, to that will be added electorally legitimated political power. Two different kinds of powers will be joined. So you're saying elephant in the room is patriarchy. We are hearing from her a very detailed account of how men remain in power, right? And the election is not doing much to change it. So there is a very remarkable, you're providing rather detailed arguments, empirical arguments, which are of roughly similar kind, though he was not talking about women, he was talking about Dalits, right? But both are underrepresented and underprivileged categories, right? So that's why there is a family resemblance there which might be noted. However, those who are studying, and you might want to therefore take issue with them, let's say Francesca, I don't know how, I don't remember now how Thibaut comes out on this, but in UP, but Francesca's book, Jasenia, which is also in our prize-winning book in our series, which says that Dalits are now better treated than before if they are in power. Right? They're better treated than before at the local level. That is the conclusion she's coming to. However, things could be better. One could argue right, but then social changes of this kind, where you are attacking, let's say, white privilege in American South or upper caste privilege in, at least in the North. In the South, it took very long, and she's saying actually it may not be true. As we think that in the South, it took the situation, caste dynamics is very different. Caste dynamics is very different, right?
I agree. I'm from Mysore, so.
Okay. So Mysore is very different from Tamil Nadu, right?
Yeah.
There's a princely this, and we say in many parts we started saying that Karnataka is a North Indian state of South India. Think about that state. Think about no. But anyway, this is not the time to. But Tamil Nadu has been seen as has witnessed the most substantial caste liberation. It may not be ideal, but it's not 1 as opposed to 0. It's more than 0.5. That's the argument compared to UP and Rajasthan, which may therefore also fit in the. So anyway, the point is that she's saying, Francesca is reporting to us very systematically that Dalits are better treated than before. Those who are in power, right, have gained, the term was, but anyway, an everyday respect or so. Simon Shusha is reporting the same incidentally in his work, right? So there is Ambedkar on one side that it will make things worse. They're saying no, it is making things better, though it may not be as the results are not as spectacular as some might have expected, right? So the point here is, it may be that the women's question needs more time, right? It may be. I don't know how else to put it? Because Ambedkar is also not right about urban India, incidentally. The argument was, in urban India, Dalits will be liberated. Because one reason why Dalits, why did he say villages were a cesspool? Why did he say that? Because you could plainly see, you know who the Dalit person is, where he or she lives, right? You know that. And therefore, and there's no way you can know that in Bombay here, right? Though he was thrown out of a Parsi guest house, actually. Well, that's a famous story, right? When he went to stay there, he was thrown out. Anyway, but he said, urban India, we are working on urban India. We've been working for 10 years. We have 15 cities in our project. It is not liberated from those, right? But you could argue that it's better liberated. You could certainly say that. But the idea of a Dalit liberation in the cities of India is, I don't know when it will happen. It may happen. It's not as bad as in some villages, but certainly. The larger point here is there may be a question of time here, which is theoretically and politically extremely relevant. And I don't know how you'll come out on that.
I mean, I'll just quickly respond. I agree with what you said, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to kind of collect data in the Tulunadu and places around. Unfortunately, it's not progressed as much as I wanted to, so can't really, at least I cannot make any strong claims, but at least my experience kind of reflects what you've said. In terms of time, yes, we completely have, in fact, in the paper also, we acknowledge that we cannot rule out that we need more time. That is certainly a given. I have read the Ambedkar's criticism of electoral politics in rural India. I also thought of—
Is there a book on it, or you went through?
I went through the Constituent Assembly debate.
Yeah. That's what we're going through.
And again, it's a vast thing, so I might have selectively cherry picked.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why I did not include that in the paper.
Yeah.
But point well taken about that also.
That's what he's arguing, right?
Yeah.
It makes the power doubly worse.
Power doubly worse because you already have these social structures. You add electoral politics. It adds legitimacy to the social structure as the.
So but just one more sentence there. Structural rigidity. We also have this question in political science, right? Can structural rigidities of this kind, not all structural rigidities, I don't think one should talk about all. Can structural rigidities of this kind, women's power in society, Dalit power in society, or its lack, or its absence, how much can political engineering or new political institutions or new ways of organizing political institutions, right? How can new political arrangements attack structural rigidities of a certain kind? Right? We have a new Nobel Prize which says institutions once in place and once rigidified last forever and shape a lot. I don't think they're right, but not in this 300-year perspective or 400-year perspective. But there is an argument there, which is about politics. And remember, the argument also in Constituent Assembly was Ambedkar won the local government, right? But otherwise, his argument remained at the state level, at the national level, political institutions and legal changes will change societal realities. He did say that. That's in a very, as Khosla puts it, it's a very Hobbesian point. State power can change social realities. Right? That's a very Hobbesian point.
Let's go to follow me, then we'll just do it. I don't know.
Oh, mine is already.
Great. So we'll just go around the table.
So I was actually thinking about your work and how it compares to the big literature on caste and reservations, and that has had like a longer precedent. And here it might be useful to like just compare social mobilization versus political mobilization and reservations, right? So the big finding that we have from that body of work is that one, there's a big difference between the North and the South. So in places that have had a long history of social movements, just the reservation itself just acts out very differently. And then, and here too, it would be interesting to look at like the different groups. So Francesca's work, for example, she finds that quotas don't do anything for social development, right? Like the spending patterns are virtually similar in quota areas versus non-reservation areas. But she's looking at SCs. But if we look at OBCs in power, OBC representation is a very good determinant of OBC quotas, and the combination of the, I mean, this is what I find in my research is the combination of reservations in the bureaucracy, which came about only with political representation. The interaction effects are actually positive for social development, right? So here we're looking at two groups where one, where there was mobilization, one where there wasn't, or like two regions where the difference is basically the same. And I agree with you, I mean, like patriarchy is everywhere across India, but I wonder if like places that have had a women's movement, and if you separate that out, whether the results are going to be any different. And it might just be, you know, younger people who are now becoming a little more enthusiastic about politics and are running on their own without a lot of like, you know, family baggage or like a husband's card or a father's card. And statistically, I'm guessing that it would be very difficult to find effects because those are such small numbers. But yeah, like in the larger scheme of things, like Francesca didn't find any results, and that was 70 years of reservations. And there's only one.
Not in everyday treatment. She argued everyday treatment is different.
Yeah, I mean that's
Everyday treatment and respect given.
right.
And you're talking about public goods distribution.
What is in American literature was always called civil rights of blacks, right? Did you
Right.
treat them well? Do you have do they have access to toilets, to water
Right.
fountains, and
And
not
here,
toilets, not
for
here,
me,
water
it's
fountains.
important to distinguish between attitudes and behavior
Yeah.
because attitudes don't change, even when you have a Dalit in power, right?
In fact, Shushan,
That's
Simon
what-
gets
Simon,
into
yeah,
that.
like,
Simon
So
argues
what
that.
you see is because you're scared that you'll be put in jail, you
Correct,
start to
correct.
like
Yeah.
behave a
Because they're
little
powerful.
better, but
Right.
patriarchy or the caste ideology is still strong. So some larger questions for you.
No, yeah, I kind of thought about, I mean, at least in this
Also,
paper.
Amit Ahuja argument
Yes.
about argument is that where social mobilization, now he compares 4 states for Dalits, right? 2 states where social mobilization went very far, and then came reservations. There, the story is very different compared to UP and Bihar, where Dalit politics emerged as reservation politics rather than mobilization. Right?
And we just haven't seen something similar for women, but it's also because I don't know enough about it.
No, again, at least in these two, for this thing, I don't have the data on that. But that is something that I've thought about, the social movement and other. I have, again, this is anecdotal and there's only so much we can go with anecdotes, I agree. But while looking at state level representation in India, my prior going into it was that states that have had quotas even before constitutional requirements of 93 would be doing better. The Karnataka is one example where it was introduced in 1989. In fact, reservations of some kind for women and other castes actually predated independence in Mysore state at least, right? It had the first women's studies department in the country, first women's college in the country. Women's representation was like 3%, at least at the state assembly level, right? The parties have started. It's like the
First
party.
state planning agency also you might want to.
Yeah.
That's a book we're considering right now. That's right.
Okay.
Victor Hiraiya was there in 1918, had this planning model. Mysore state.
Yeah.
Not.
So the social movement, I'm sure there'll be differential effects for sure, because it at least that's my prior going in. State representation wise, it doesn't look like it. But for this particular paper, at least what we were thinking something along those lines, if there was any kind of women's organization or something, at least within a state, if we can map it and see if the effects are different, would it be different? That's something that we want to do. Unfortunately, the data exists somewhere in ether, but not that is machine readable or in any case. So that's something that we thought about very strongly, at least in UP. Okay, can we see whether there is divergence in West and East UP? There's the land tenure systems are different, or something to get something more out of it.
Soli's book is also on Rajasthan.
That's on self-help groups though.
Madhya Pradesh.
It's Madhya Pradesh, right?
Madhya Pradesh is what I thought.
And that's on women.
Yeah, but she does find variation in women's activism.
Actually, that was my suggestion.
Yeah.
Like, you may want to look at places where self-help groups predate the adoption of reservation, and those where they arise subsequently. And actually, your Uttarakhand case is what I thought about, because the Chipko movement is also has roots in feminist mobilization. So you actually have an opportunity in that state to even study, at least in some measure, like mobilization that has roots with something to do along the lines that you're suggesting.
So let's collect the last two questions and we'll give Varun some time to respond. I will also insert myself at the end with some questions. Okay,
Yeah, like, just want to think about the time in these things. So in Tamil Nadu, we have 97, I think we had 33% reservation, and then 50% in 2016. But if we think it has not progressed, we still have 5% state level representation. So quotas, what is it solving for? It is increasing the representation. Does it? So in Tamil Nadu, when political leaders talk about it, they say we have 56% of women in local bodies. The 6% is more, but it doesn't translate into state. Why is it? Is my question. That's why we want to contest election, whatever. And the other thing is about Dalit women panchayat leaders. They face so much violence. Like, yes, when they get into this, they get the power, but what is the cost of that power is something which because there is so much violence that happens to Dalit panchayat leaders, which we lost.
Yeah.
take one more
Oh,
question
okay.
and then we'll expect that.
I'll be quick. My main question was about, sorry.
No, please, go ahead. I've spoken enough.
Okay, was about electoral participation. So looking at the effects of voter turnout, and since you have numbers disaggregated by gender, whether you can kind of, do you know, is that?
No, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I was just wondering, on the one hand, you have people like Soledad Prilliman at Stanford who argue that the House will capture the women's vote, but I'm curious to see if women voters have higher turnouts at specific points, and whether not necessarily do women always vote for women candidates, but whether it's a galvanizing factor in bringing them to the polling booth. And also just wondering about, in terms of messaging around the time of elections, women's safety tends to be quite a motivator for issues. So I think a lot of the times with women's activism and movements, they tend to be more elite and available to people with access to higher education institutions. But on the other hand, whether looking at statistics on women's safety violation just as a rough measure, rather than kind of more elite-based urban or semi-urban activism might help.
Sorry, I thought you had.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
So I had 2 points. One, the self-help group point, I think you should look at, particularly mobilization. I think and one is theory, one is empiric. So the theory point that I had was, it seems to me that like your contribution sits at the intersection of 3 literatures. One is the story of like democratic accountability and are voters updating, and are they rewarding, and is there taste-based discrimination, etc., which I think finds mention in your presentation and paper. The other 2, I think, may be doing a lot more and therefore might be better to bring them in. So one of them is political selection and incentives to kind of stay and do things. And the third, which I think is what we found echo here, is the literature on power, the nature of power and intersectionality. That's a political theory question. So then you could get into even things like Gavinta's study of the Appalachians and like what is the nature of power? Is it self-reinforcing and so on? So I think bringing some of those into the fold here will help that. On your point here,
It's also Ambedkar's point.
and Ambedkar's point. When you said Ambedkar's point, it exactly goes, I think, to the deeper point on the nature of
Nature of power.
power. And I think there's like a well-developed theory, whether it's Raz or Gaventa and others, and within the Indian context, where you could probably lean on to kind of set this up more as a test of 2 worldviews about what is deriving what. Are institutions, symptomatic of an underlying social reality, or are they capable of changing?
Yeah.
So that's one thing. If you go 2 tables back, I had a question for you, my empirical question.
The slides are not
Yeah, it's
working.
Okay, it's back there. We
It's
go.
back.
Try that. There. Okay.
So keep going back, just like where all those quotas are predicting the thing.
Oh, you mean,
Regression table. Yes. So I think one thing you want to test is whether all these variables barring the constant, are jointly predictive. Because it seems to me that they are directionally all pretty consistent. So this is like looking at the F stack for this regression. Because if that's the case, then your story is not no effect, that there might even be a negative effect, right? Because these, it doesn't matter whether they are small point estimates each, whether they're cumulatively even one of them or they're jointly predictive is important. So just, I think it's empirically important to check that.
That's
if you
the-
have it already.
It's, I have it, but I think it's worth highlighting that. Yeah, sure, I can do that, yeah.
Okay, so I have a couple comments and then it's all you to close this
Okay.
out. You know, fascinating presentation. One thing I wanted to highlight that didn't come up as much in the discussion is just the opportunity you have in this paper to really get at the capture component of this, right? And I think that that comes both from, you know, the measure that you're using in the phone survey, and I think that you could do a little bit more to baseline us on. I know a lot of people are working right now on this proxy politics sort of thing, but to baseline us on what this phone call captures relative to these other measures. You use the PAN card in some of your other work. Rachel, Simone, and Alyssa have used some other stuff, just to give us a sense of where that sits in the spectrum, because I think that, you know, increasingly people use the phrase sarpanchpati, but increasingly I think there's you know, a conversation about putting that on this spectrum. I think Ashley brought this up as well, and I think you can help us figure out how we should think about the phone call in that. The other thing I was going to say is it is a sad sort of, you know, story that you're telling, and I think that there is an opportunity to see if there's a possibility for some change, which would basically be looking empirically at so you call all of these places, and I wonder if you can just tell us there are a set of places where women do pick up the phone and are presumably in power. I mean, it's like 15%. I just want to know what's happening in those panchayats, in those next elections. Maybe you're not getting this because you're calling them right now, but I think that that's an opportunity, because if quotas were to have any effect, it's in places where they're not captured by men, right? And so you do have a subset of places you've identified and measured as not being captured. And so I'm just curious to know, where they are, right? And I don't remember if you did this in UP or in Rajasthan, but it would also be interesting because I mean, given all the things we've said about these two states being so patriarchal, there are a set of places where presumably women are in some sort of, you know, power in the role. And so I think that would be an interesting element. I don't know if it belongs in this paper, but I think people will, as they work on this, will be curious about that.
I would read this. I would love to.
Okay.
I think it's self-standing paper, in my opinion.
Okay, so two finger and then close this off. Yeah.
So now that like we know about the Sarpanchpatis, a lot of the bureaucrats are aware of it as well, and they want to train women politicians. They want to make sure that they're doing the work and it's not the husband. Like, I wonder if that also has an effect over time.
Sorry, we've given you so many comments.
That's okay.
But, close this off with some final remarks, and we also have a discussion afterwards, or informal, you know, chines and also, so we can
Sure.
continue the conversation there. Yeah.
The first question about what is happening at the state representation, I think parties are the answer here, because, and fortunately that's not, I can't identify the effect, but I can tell you that there is a relationship there, where the nature of political parties kind of plays a role. And classically people have called parties as personalist parties, or those which rely on local grassroots party organizations. Unfortunately, in India, there is a trend towards personalist parties that is rising. So that's at least my answer right now. Yeah, I forgot your question about the Dalit violence. Yes.
against
Yeah, so it's a very disturbing thing, and I've kind of followed the news, which is not very heartening, but it is a reality. And it happens North India, South India, everywhere. There is this divide between North and South, which is created. But I was looking at attitudes about wife beating. It is the highest in Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, which two states that rank really high.
Do you
Yeah.
believe that?
Yeah.
data?
Sorry?
Also the point you made.
Yeah. Which one?
It's a serious one. That wife beating is the highest in Mysore and Tamil Nadu.
Yeah, so
Do you believe that?
I
mean, but that's I think it's a very important question. I'm not sure that's answerable. That's
Because it's lower in other
I mean,
northern
so
states.
this was
No, that's
fact
okay.
check report. COVID was worst in Kerala and Maharashtra. So, you
There's a
know,
problem
those
with
this is,
reporting.
and
better
the
reporting.
data are broken by gender.
Right.
Women who support wife beating are also very high in South India, which is another very disturbing kind of a trend. But I'll say that. The next question was yours. Unfortunately, in this paper, I don't have turnout by gender. But I'm looking at turnout by gender for other purposes. But if I do have it, that can certainly be looked at, and I don't have it. Point taken about elite versus non-elite thing. In our case, though, we are not looking at individual opinions at all, but I completely take that point. Shikhar, that's where I needed the most comments on how to place this in the literature. So I will certainly include the nature and the power of both of the aspects that you mentioned. What is the nature of power and who gets to govern? That is something that I had not thought about that. So I will definitely include that and think more. Fayeed, capture. I don't want to say capture because political economy capture means money was exchanged. There is nothing of that sort here. I know we're talking about elite capture here, but I'll think of a suitable phrase. But yeah, male capture probably. Baseline, the Sarpanch Pati finding. I was very pleased with myself when I came up with the PAN card thing. Unfortunately, nobody is using it. So I'm not really sure whether I can say that. That's a great measure. But not many people seem to, even the review process, there was one reviewer who hated it. And the one reviewer who said this is the best measure of proxy.
What is it? Can you tell us?
So basically, if you have a PAN card, it's an indicator of you're a formal economic activity. If you're formally active economically, highly unlikely that you're a proxy. Like again, it's not a perfect measure of anything, but at least in a rural urban setting, you have economic activity. That's a proxy that we use. But I can look at Rachel and Simon's new work. I think they've changed the pitch of their paper now, so I have to read the revised pitch now to see what they're saying. So the phone survey. One of the things that I wanted to run was to see whether candidate characteristics or winner characteristics in those 15 are different. That is certainly doable. I can do it. It's a very small percentage, not powered, but I can show descriptive statistics. I did not mention it here, but we also called 200 open seats, like 200 numbers where there were no quotas. We called them as well. Response rate was a little lower. Again, we are only in our first pass. We try 3 times. So response rates always goes up in the third attempt. 50% response rate, 80% of the time, the respondent answered with open seats. I'll come to the next point. So we had 4 instances of women winning in open seats. And there was a 50-50. For 2 of them, we could speak to them directly. For 2 of them, it was their husband who intercepted the phone call. I don't make a big deal out of the 200 open seats. I think I should kind of mention that as well. The reason why is we want to do 500 calls there, and the calls are happening as we speak. So that's something that I'm not included, but I will do that. I forgot your 2 finger. I'm so sorry.
About the possibility of movement of empowerment through bureaucratic other.
Okay. So if you watched Panchayat, the bureaucrat tries hard to. The bureaucrat does try. There is some work now, I think Bhumi does this, where bureaucrats are not treating women politicians like they would treat male politicians. It's a symptom of a lot of things. It's not just bureaucrats, it's even citizens for a large extent don't take elected women seriously, at least at the local level in my experience. We don't have individual attitudes though. The bureaucrat thing, I agree. I can't measure it here. We actually wanted to, instead of surveying the politicians, we wanted to call the bureaucrat who's responsible for the panchayat secretary of these GPs to see what's happening. Unfortunately, we couldn't get their phone numbers. If we could get phone numbers, my plan was to call them and call the representative.
Panchayat secretary is appointed by the state government.
Yes. And talk to the panchayat. It's like a cadre-based state level public service. Yeah. So call the panchayat secretary and ask about the elected representative. It's like an informant survey, but that would complement calling the actual representative. Because unlikely, but it is possible that when they said that they are busy, they are actually busy. I don't think it is, but it is a possibility indeed. But if we had supplemented with panchayat bureaucrats, then it would be great. I couldn't get their phone numbers, unfortunately.
And this is also something that would take time, right? Because
some of them really hate being spoken to. Like they're like, why are you bothering me?
No, I meant like the empowerment itself.
Oh yeah, of course, yes, that will take a long time. And bureaucrats are, and Yeah, but that's something that is in my mind to call them and speak with them, but unfortunately I haven't done it. But yeah, I think that is a play as well.
Well, thank you, Varun, for this amazing presentation. Thank you to those in the comments.